What's good, Gacha gang? Kawaii50 back with another FGO video, here to talk about the most powerful kaiju known to man, Kingprotea.
そんな、あの壁は50メートルだぞ。やつだ。
We are going to be going over all aspects of Kingprotea's admittedly very strange kit, and try to figure out the best way to make her work. I know a lot of people are confused about her kit, and I was kind of confused the first time I saw it too, but I think I've got it figured out. So bear with me, and we will do what we can to make Kingprotea a staple part of your team. Be sure to like and subscribe if this video helps you out. Alright, let's get to it. So Kingprotea has a quick Arts Buster deck and a Buster type AoE Noble Phantasm. So it seems like she's going to be doing a lot of wave clearing. Looking at her stats, her max HP is a wee bit on the lower end at 13,338. That's kind of on the lower end for some 5 stars. But, gang, there is a reason for that, and we'll talk over that when we get to her skills. Her attack, however, at 12,835, is at this time the second highest attack in the entire game. And it makes sense considering Kingprotea's, well, monstrous physique. Looking at MP per hit at a 0.56% with 2 arts cards that hit 3 times, as well as a quick card that hits 3 times, that ends up being pretty okay. It's a pretty decent amount of NP gain. Star Absorption is at 100, which is your typical Saber average, so she'll be getting stars more often than a lot of your other, say, Berserkers or something like that, but she's going to compete hard against Archers and Riders for those stars. So Kingprotea does have a whopping 5 passives, the 2 most important ones being Madness Enhancement A+, and Territory Creation Rank EX. Territory Creation is going to help Kingprotea's overall NP gain, and Madness Enhancement is mainly there to help her damage. We're going to kick this off by looking at the upgraded version of Kingprotea's first skill, and this skill is weird. This is Huge Scale C+. So this applies Infinite Growth, which provides growth, as well as growth NP resist up after her rank up quest every turn for 10 turns. Now, growth and growth NP resist up both do different things. Growth increases your max HP permanently, and this has a maximum of 10 stacks. And this is why Kingprotea's HP starts a little bit on the lower side, because her HP ends up getting absolutely out of hand. Added in her rank up is Growth NP Resist Up, which reduces the NP damage she takes by 8% per stack permanently. And this has a maximum of 10 stacks, which means she will get up to 80% Noble Phantasm Resist. I am overall going to recommend maxing this first skill last, and there's a couple of reasons why. First off, on release, Kingprotea will not have the NP Resist Up bonus, so you're going to have to wait a little bit for that. On top of that, the maximum HP you gain every single turn from this buff, well, it's already pretty high, so you're going to be getting a solid pool of HP from that. On top of that, her other 2 skills are just a little bit more important when it comes to maxing them out in order to boost Kingprotea's effectiveness. And that 12 turn to 10 turn cooldown, well, that is still a very long cooldown. So that is not really going anywhere. This skill is incredibly important for Kingprotea's kit in regards to both her next skill as well as her Noble Phantasm. So you need to keep that in mind and watch those stacks of growth that Kingprotea gets as the fight continues. Kingprotea's second skill is Infantile Regression Rank C. This decreases all of her skill cooldowns by 1 turn, so it does help with the massive cooldown on her first skill. This also increases her NP gauge based on the number of active growth buffs she has. So if I have read all of this stuff on the wiki correctly, and I feel like I have gone over this a couple of times, that 10 to 20% you see, she gains that for her Noble Phantasm per stack of growth she has on her. So if it ends up with skill level 1 on this, and Kingprotea has 10 stacks of growth, you are looking at a 100% NP gain. This does unfortunately come at a cost. You remove all of the growth stacks and eventually the growth NP resist stacks on Kingprotea as well in order to pay for that Noble Phantasm charge. So this is kind of a one and done thing, and you're gonna want to use this only when you really, really need it, because you are going to be sacrificing those growth stacks and that HP and Noble Phantasm damage resist for that. So sort of like a fight where Kingprotea builds up and up and up, and then releases all of her energy in a gigantic burst when you need it. So if you want Kingprotea to be really, really effective with her Noble Phantasm, she's gonna need the support to fill her NP gauge, so you, at best, can only use this either when absolutely necessary, or when you need to get ready to get a bunch of Noble Phantasm back and immediately go into another huge scale C+ buff. So definitely keep that in mind. And if you're trying to get around this with buff removal resist, well, I'm sorry, this automatically goes through buff removal resist. You're not going to get around this with craft essences. And you will want to level this skill second, mainly because that single percentage of NP refund, well, if you got 10 stacks, that is 10% extra NP refund. It can get pretty crazy. And Kingprotea's final skill is thankfully simple. It is Monstrous Strength rank EX. This increases her attack by 20 to 40% for 3 turns and is on a very short 5-turn cooldown, just like her second skill. I recommend maxing this first, mainly because a lot of fights in this game, barring challenge quests, don't really take that many turns. So having a 3-turn attack buff can come a long, long way, especially if you're one of those crazy people that wants to find a way to work Kingprotea into your farming routine. This is going to be the absolute best way for you to burst down enemies in short fights. Kingprotea's Noble Phantasm is Iravata King Size rank E. Now, this provides a 20% Buster effectiveness buff, while Kingprotea has that growth buff on her from her very first skill. This activates before damage is dealt. On top of that, this Noble Phantasm also has an overcharge effect where it further increases the Buster card effectiveness of Kingprotea that activates again before damage is dealt. If you're looking at this in what I believe is a more reasonable world to sort of get this going, use this last in a Noble Phantasm chain. You are looking at 300% overcharge plus the 20% from the Buster effectiveness boost from having growth on it. That is going to be a total of 60% Buster effectiveness. And with the ability to Buster Brave Chain, that is going to give Kingprotea a lot of opportunity to pound an enemy into the ground. And it's going to be a very, very hilarious turn of events. But that does require a lot of setup, and it's something to consider. It's also something to consider that you are hampering your Noble Phantasm's damage by an overall 20% if you needed to do that charge to get to the NP, and, well, you don't have that growth buff anymore, so you don't get that extra 20% Buster effectiveness. It's really a big ebb and flow when it comes to Kingprotea, and using her buffs and her demerits when you know it is safe to do so is key to making her an effective member of your team. So who do we pair Kingprotea with? With such an oddball servant, we actually have a couple of options available to us. Outside of course, you would probably want your typical Merlin. Speaking of the heavy hitter supports, I actually would recommend Tamamo no Mai with Kingprotea as well, because she actually does provide a lot that would really help Kingprotea out. She provides an NP strength boost, which would help with Protea's Noble Phantasm damage, and most importantly, she provides health recovery and a skill cooldown reduction, allowing for those longer fights, well, Kingprotea to get that little bit closer to using her growth boost again. Barring that, let's start dipping into our freebie options, starting with the God of Medicine, Asclepius. I like the restore HP he has, I like the debuff removal he has, and the NP gauge and NP gain boost he is able to provide for Kingprotea as well. With all of these things in Asclepius' toolkit, this helps ensure that you're not going to have to rely on Kingprotea's second skill, which removes all of her growth buffs, unless you really have to. You can definitely effectively use it as a last resort. BB actually remains a delightful pick as well. She provides Kingprotea with an NP gauge boost, has the ability to heal Kingprotea, and can also remove evasion and invincibility buffs from an enemy. If you remember, Kingprotea does not have the ability to do that herself with any of her noble phantasms, so you can clear out some debuffs with BB and then have Kingprotea go in for the killing blow. With her Noble Phantasm buff, Osakabe Hime is a wonderful pick to pair with Kingprotea due to the Buster Card effectiveness boost she's able to provide with her Noble Phantasm, on top of a max HP as well as a defense boost to allow Kingprotea with her massive pool of HP to weather tons of hits. Osakabe Hime can also reduce an enemy's defense and increase Kingprotea's NP gauge, again making it so you don't have to rely so much on that second skill. I like Surma Yi, mainly for volume and Hydrogyrum, providing Kingprotea with an invincible that she does not have herself. Surma Yi can also provide Kingprotea with a defense boost, a damage cut, multiple NP gauge boosts, as well as an attack boost as well. This is all for the low cost of eating all of your critical stars. But since Kingprotea does not really have a critical focused kit, it doesn't really end up mattering as much as you might think. Of course, Queen Himiko remains a fantastic choice for any Buster focused damage dealer. She can provide Kingprotea with an NP gauge boost, Buster Star Gather, Buster Critical Strength, and Attack Boost, as well as give her her own Fragment of 2030 for just a few turns. Queen Himiko remains a great pick for any Buster servant. And finally, I do also feel the need to mention Summer BB, mainly for the powerful effects that Faceless Moon provides to Kingprotea. With Kingprotea wanting to get that NP gain from her skills, or even have the Buster cards available to deal damage while the rest of her team charges up her Noble Phantasm, you're going to want to manipulate the deck so you can get her the most opportunities to attack and to use the correct combination of cards that you can. So being able to keep those two Busters to Buster Brave Chain off of Kingprotea's Noble Phantasm, or if you really need to charge NPs in a pinch, keeping those arts and quick cards so Kingprotea can do that herself as well, that is gonna be invaluable. And on turns when Kingprotea has an off time from attacking, maybe she had to blow her second skill or something like that, BB has the critical effectiveness boost and the self NP steroid and evade to pick up the slack on Protea's behalf. When it comes to Kingprotea's craft essences, we are looking at Buster Card effectiveness, NP strength, and starting NP gauge as our primary stats. We want Kingprotea to be able to use her Noble Phantasm quickly in shorter fights, we want to maximize that Buster bonus, and we want her Noble Phantasm to deal extra damage if at all possible. We want to maximize that fact that she has the growth stat on her, and if we can, try to avoid using that second skill unless it is our last resort. For my freebie option, I've got to recommend Hero Ellie's Adventure, providing Buster Card effectiveness and NP strength. Beyond that, there are a couple of craft essences that I do consider far more effective. The first one being First Sunrise. If you manage to be lucky enough to get First Sunrise max limit broken, you're looking at 20% Buster effectiveness and a 50% starting NP gauge to give Kingprotea a bit of a head start when it comes to going into battle. You can also get bonuses off of that overcharge. Remember, the overcharge does grant additional Buster Card effectiveness. So if we can manipulate that with something like Devilish Bodhisattva, we get our starting NP gauge as well as a bonus NP overcharge. If you're confident in the amount of NP gauge Kingprotea can gain and are instead looking for damage, well, look no further than the severely underrated Duke of Flames. This grants NP strength and a bonus to NP overcharge levels as well. Personally, if I had to pick my absolute favorite CE to put on Kingprotea, I would honestly say Gilgamesh in New York is my personal champion. This provides Buster Card effectiveness and NP gain. Yes, it might end up affecting her Noble Phantasm damage a little bit, but most of her Noble Phantasm damage comes from Buster Card effectiveness. And of course, you're going to want to focus on using a Buster Brave Chain with her Noble Phantasm, if at all possible, to capitalize on that. So let's sink more into Buster Card effectiveness, and let's sink a bit into NP gain so we don't have to rely so much on that second skill. When I dug down deep to look at Kingprotea's command codes, I realized that other than NP damage, of course, if you can afford to do it, I would honestly recommend trying to buff her up with things that could recover amounts of HP on her. Overall, individually, yes, they might be minuscule, but if you go ahead and pile all of these command codes together, well, you're overall going to be getting a servant that can really benefit from their increased HP pool, and even potentially a servant that just is basically unable to die if the damage ends up being low enough. So let's take a look at what some of our options are. Of course, let's start with Da Vinci Chan. 15% NP damage. You need to use the card before the damage is dealt. So I would say maybe if you're prioritizing a Buster Brave Chain, you're gonna have to sacrifice that Buster card from the tail end of the chain in order to do that, or you're going to have to give up the option of Buster Brave Chaining entirely and instead decide that you want to focus on NP damage instead. It's a toss-up, it's a risk, but if you're looking to go the NP damage route with Kingprotea, this is what I would recommend. But going beyond that, there are, of course, the healing command codes. To start with, Maiden of Orleans. Once every 3 turns, Kingprotea will recover 1000 HP when attacking using this engraved card. So Kingprotea can get back 1000 HP every time she uses the card, and we can end up coupling this with other command codes to increase the overall amount she is healing. Of course, I want to recommend Lucky Beast. This recovers 200 HP when attacking using the engraved card. So use this with Maiden of Orleans, boom, 1200 HP back in the bank. But I'm sure you might be using somebody else to recover Kingprotea's HP, possibly an Asclepius or a BB or something like that. Well, look no further than Good Wife Wise Fox. This increases the healing Kingprotea receives by 50% for 1 time over 2 turns when attacking using that engraved card. So Tamamo has the capability to heal Kingprotea for even more than you would expect. Overall, gang, I really do think Kingprotea is an incredibly interesting servant to use. Her growth mechanic isn't necessarily really good, but it's also nowhere near really bad either. This is a servant where you really have to think when you're using her. If you are using Kingprotea, you are going to be constantly checking those buffs, weighing your options, being like, okay, is it good for me to sacrifice my growth buffs now? Or can I wait another turn, and would this be a more opportune time? Is my enemy going to Noble Phantasm? What team am I going to build around this character? There's really going to be a lot of thought when it comes to building your Kingprotea team. And I've seen people online that have really thought about how they are building their Kingprotea, seen them tackle some challenge quests with gusto, and she can be a force to be reckoned with. But this servant, more so than a lot of the others, you've really gotta put in that work. You've really gotta know the character, how she works, when the best time to pop X, Y, or Z buff is. Build an entire team around her in order for her to function well. Yes, I know most of the time in FGO you build a team around whoever you want your primary DPS to be, but with Kingprotea it is not so much something you just do intrinsically, it is pretty much a necessity in order to make her a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. But overall, I am pleased with what they have done with Kingprotea. I am pleased that they tried something different, something new with this character. And I'm personally excited to use my friend's Kingproteas, or hopefully use my own Kingprotea if I'm able to summon her. I think she's a very interesting servant. But of course, I want to know what you all think, so go ahead and let me know your thoughts about Kingprotea down in the comment section below. If you're playing on JP, let me know if there are any other teams you might have used her in, any craft essences you've equipped, allies, command codes, the whole shebang. And if you've summoned for Kingprotea after you've watched this video, well, go ahead and let me know down below if you have, because I will be very, very happy for both you and her if you have, because Kingprotea is so pure and so nice that she really does deserve a good home. Again, I'd like to thank you all for watching this video. If you want to talk more FGO, my Discord is always available. If you think I'm doing a good job as well, my Patreon is open too. Big thank you to all of the patrons out there. I hope you're all having a phenomenal day. I'll see you in the next video.